The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with the electric promise of 1,000 different journeys. For most, it was a place of hopeful beginnings and tearful reunions. But for one man standing patiently in the first-class line, his journey was about to be stopped dead in its tracks, not by a security threat or a cancelled flight, but by a single, unyielding gate agent. She held his boarding pass like a death sentence, her eyes filled with a judgment that had nothing to do with airline regulations. She had no idea she wasn't just challenging a passenger. She was challenging the very foundation of the airline she worked for. What happens when a person with a little bit of power tries to humiliate a man who has it all? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about a reckoning that echoed from the check-in desk all the way to the boardroom. Elias Vance was a man who moved through the world with a deliberate quietness that was often mistaken for meekness. It was a useful misinterpretation, one he'd learned to leverage over the years. Dressed in a simple, dark grey cashmere sweater, well-fitted jeans, and a pair of tasteful but unassuming leather sneakers, he could have been anyone. A professor on sabbatical, a musician travelling to a gig, an architect visiting a site. There was no ostentatious display of wealth. The only hint of his true station was the watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, with its elegant, minimalist face. It wasn't a watch that screamed for attention, it was a watch that rewarded it. It was a quiet statement of timeless quality, much like the man himself. He was flying Aura Airlines, Flight 88, from JFK to London Heathrow. It was his airline, a fact known to only a handful of senior executives. He hadn't founded it in a flashy IPO or inherited it. He'd acquired it 5 years ago, when it was a failing legacy carrier called Transatlantic Air, bleeding money and hemorrhaging customer trust. Elias, through his private equity firm, Vance Capital, had seen a diamond in the rough. He'd poured not just hundreds of millions of dollars, but his very ethos into its rebranding. Aura Airlines was meant to represent a new standard in air travel, efficiency, comfort, and above all, dignity for every passenger. He made periodic, unannounced flights like this on his own carriers, always booking under a slightly varied name. Today, he was E. Vance, to get a raw, unfiltered view of the customer experience. Standing in the priority boarding line, he watched the gate agent. Her name tag read Brenda. She was a woman in her late 40s with a severe haircut and an expression that seemed permanently soured, as if she'd just sipped curdled milk. She moved with a brittle, jerky efficiency, her voice a sharp, nasal instrument she used to corral passengers like unruly cattle. "Next!" she barked, her eyes flicking over Elias as he stepped forward, not truly seeing him, but cataloguing him. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on his sneakers, and a faint, almost imperceptible sneer tightened her lips. Elias offered a polite, small smile. "Good evening. Just checking in." He placed his passport and boarding pass on the counter. Brenda snatched them up. Her fingers, tipped with long, crimson nails, tapped impatiently on the screen of her terminal. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was like a woodpecker drilling into a dead tree. She grunted. It was a sound pregnant with manufactured trouble. Elias waited. He'd seen this before. It was the little theatre of the petty tyrant, the overture to an unnecessary drama. He remained silent, letting her play her part. "There seems to be a discrepancy with your booking, sir," she said, the word sir coated in a thick, condescending syrup. She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the screen as if the computer itself were her ally in this confrontation. "Oh?" Elias said, his voice calm and even. "I booked it through our corporate portal last week. Is there something I can help clarify?" Brenda finally lifted her eyes to meet his. They were cold, flat, and filled with a dismissive certainty. "The system is flagging your seat assignment. It says it's unconfirmed, even though you have a boarding pass. It also looks like the payment method has a security alert on it." Elias knew for a fact this was impossible. His bookings were handled by his chief of staff and were routed through a dedicated ironclad account. A security alert was out of the question. "I can assure you the payment is secure," he said politely. "Perhaps you could try refreshing the system. Sometimes there's a lag." Brenda let out a short, sharp sigh, a gust of put-upon frustration. "Sir, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know how the system works." She pushed the passport and boarding pass back across the counter towards him, a gesture of finality. "You'll need to step aside and go to the main customer service desk at the entrance of the terminal to sort this out. I have a plane to board." The line behind Elias was growing. A man in a crisp business suit huffed impatiently. A woman with 2 tired children began to shift her weight. Elias felt the familiar sting of public humiliation, a low-grade heat that spread across his neck. It was a feeling he'd known well in his youth, but one he had thought his success had insulated him from. He was wrong. "With all due respect," Elias said, his voice dropping a decibel but gaining an edge of steel. "The customer service desk is a 20-minute walk from here. Boarding is closing in 30 minutes. There's no reason this can't be resolved right here. Can you please tell me what the specific security alert is?" Brenda's eyes narrowed. She saw his quiet persistence not as a customer's reasonable request, but as a challenge to her authority. And she was not a woman who liked to be challenged, especially not by someone she had already sized up and dismissed. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of a security alert," she snapped, her voice rising. "For all I know, this is a fraudulent booking. Now I'm not going to ask you again. Step aside." She gestured dismissively with her hand, already looking past him to the next passenger. "Next in line," she called out, her voice sharp and final. But Elias Vance did not move. He stood his ground, his polite smile gone, replaced by a look of profound disappointment. He hadn't wanted this. He had just wanted to get to London. But Brenda, with her sour disposition and baseless suspicions, had just made a decision that would unravel her entire life. She just didn't know it yet. The man in the suit behind Elias grumbled audibly. "Come on, pal, just do what she says. Some of us have flights to catch." Elias ignored him. His focus was entirely on Brenda, who was now actively refusing to make eye contact, her face a mask of defiant bureaucracy. "Ma'am," Elias began again, his tone meticulously respectful but firm. "My name is E. Vance. The ticket was purchased with a corporate American Express Centurion card. There is no possibility of fraud. I would appreciate it if you would simply call a supervisor to help resolve this." He was giving her an out, a chance to de-escalate, to pass the problem up the chain. But to Brenda, this was a further slight. He was questioning her competency. In her mind, she had already convicted him. He didn't look the part for first class. He was too calm, too unassuming. The expensive watch, if she even recognized its brand, was probably a fake, a prop in a larger scam. Her mind, a fertile ground for prejudice, had already cultivated a full narrative. "A supervisor will tell you the exact same thing," she retorted, her voice dripping with scorn. "The main desk is where these issues are handled. We are gate agents. We board the plane. You are holding up the line for legitimate passengers." The word hung in the air between them. Legitimate. A young woman standing behind the businessman, a law student named Sarah Jenkins, felt her own indignation rise. She could see exactly what was happening. It was a classic case of profiling, wrapped in the veneer of corporate policy. Elias took a slow breath, centering himself. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but he refused to let it show. The moment he raised his voice, he knew he would be painted as the angry black man, fulfilling the stereotype she was already projecting onto him. He would lose. "I understand your position," he said, his voice a low, reasonable murmur. "However, your refusal to help or even investigate the issue is what's causing the delay. Could you please just get your supervisor? I'm happy to wait here, out of the way, until they arrive." He gestured to a small, empty space beside the podium. His request was impeccably reasonable. It was also a checkmate. To refuse now would be a blatant dereliction of duty. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. She was trapped. With a theatrical, long-suffering sigh, she snatched the phone from its cradle. "Fine," she hissed. "But don't think for a second it's going to change anything." She turned her back to him, deliberately creating a physical barrier, and spoke into the receiver in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Yeah, this is Brenda at B24. I need a supervisor down here. Got a situation. A passenger. A first-class passenger." She said the words with heavy sarcasm. "Whose ticket is flagged. He's refusing to move. Yes, refusing. Causing a scene." Elias stood motionless, listening to the casual, cruel misrepresentation of events. He wasn't causing a scene. He was the scene's victim. A few minutes later, a man named Mark Henderson scurried into view. He was in his 50s, with a receding hairline, a paunch that strained the buttons of his company blazer, and the perpetually harried look of a middle manager stretched too thin. He exuded an aura of wanting to be anywhere else. "What's the problem here, Brenda?" he asked, avoiding Elias's gaze entirely, treating him like a piece of furniture around which a discussion was being had. "Mr. Henderson," Brenda began, her voice taking on a martyred tone. "This passenger's booking is flagged for a payment security alert. I've instructed him to go to the main service desk as per protocol, and he is refusing to leave the gate area and causing a disturbance." Henderson finally glanced at Elias, his eyes full of weary exasperation. "Sir, you heard my agent. We have procedures for a reason. We can't have you holding up the boarding process. If you'll just cooperate and head to the main desk." "Mr. Henderson," Elias interjected, his voice cutting through the manager's tired monologue. "My name is Evans. I am a paying, first-class passenger. Your agent has not told me what the specific issue is. She has accused me of having a fraudulent ticket. She has refused to perform a basic system refresh. And she has now lied about my conduct. I have not caused a disturbance. I have simply requested a resolution at the gate for a problem that appears to be internal to your system." He laid out the facts, cleanly and without emotion. Henderson seemed taken aback by his articulate and calm demeanor. He looked from Elias to Brenda, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Is this true, Brenda?" he asked, his voice weaker than before. "Did you tell him it was fraudulent?" "He has a suspicious booking," she insisted, her voice growing shrill. "The system doesn't lie. I was following protocol to protect the company's assets." It was a masterful pivot. She was no longer a rude gate agent. She was a valiant defender of corporate security. Henderson, a man whose entire career was built on avoiding conflict, took the path of least resistance. He sided with his employee. "Sir, I'm going to have to trust my agent's assessment," he said, puffing out his chest slightly. "The protocol is the protocol. If you don't proceed to the main customer service desk immediately, I'll have to call airport security to have you removed." The threat was stark. Now he wasn't just a passenger with a ticket issue. He was a potential security risk. The humiliation was complete. The crowd was watching, their faces a mixture of pity, annoyance, and morbid curiosity. Sarah, the law student, could stay silent no longer. She stepped forward, her phone held up, discreetly recording. "Excuse me, sir," she said, addressing Henderson. "I've been standing right here. This man has been nothing but polite. Your agent is the one who has been hostile and unhelpful. Threatening to call security is a massive overreach." Henderson's head snapped towards her. "Ma'am, this is an official airline matter. Please step back." "It's a customer service matter that you're turning into a security issue," she countered, unintimidated. Elias gave Sarah a brief, grateful nod. But he knew this was his battle. He looked at Henderson, then at Brenda, who was now smirking, sensing victory. He had given them every chance to do the right thing. He had followed the rules. He had been polite. He had appealed to reason. And in return, he had been met with a wall of suspicion, disrespect, and bureaucratic inertia. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was a simple, elegant, black smartphone. Nothing flashy. He held it up. "Very well, Mr. Henderson," Elias said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "You want to call security, but before you do, I'm going to make a call of my own." Brenda scoffed. "Who are you going to call? Your lawyer? Go ahead. It won't get you on this plane." Elias didn't answer her. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over a name. The name simply read, Chen. He pressed the call button. He was done playing by their rules. It was time to introduce them to his. The air at Gate B24 grew thick with tension. Every eye was on Elias Vance, the quiet man in the cashmere sweater, who was now the defiant center of a brewing storm. Brenda folded her arms, a smug look of victory on her face. Henderson shifted his weight, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The classic posture of a man who senses he's lost control of a situation, but is too committed to back down. Elias put the phone to his ear. It rang once, twice. "Chen," a crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. "David," Elias said, his voice low and steady, yet it carried an unmistakable weight of authority that cut through the airport's ambient noise. "It's Elias Vance." At the mention of his full name, Henderson's brow furrowed. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He probably saw it on some corporate memo he'd deleted without reading. Brenda, however, just rolled her eyes, whispering to Henderson, "He's just name-dropping. It's pathetic." "Elias, to what do I owe the pleasure?" David Chen's voice was warm, but it immediately shifted. "Is everything all right? You're not supposed to be calling me right now. You're supposed to be in the air." "That's the issue, David," Elias said, his gaze fixed on Henderson. "I'm at JFK, Terminal 4, Gate B24 for Aura Flight 88, and I'm being denied boarding." There was a moment of dead silence on the other end of the line. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than any shout. When David Chen spoke again, all warmth was gone. His voice was ice. "Denied boarding? By whom? On what grounds?" "The gate agent, a woman named Brenda," Elias continued calmly, "and her supervisor, a Mr. Mark Henderson, claim my ticket is fraudulent. They've threatened to call security to have me removed from the gate." He watched as the color drained from Henderson's face. The name Elias Vance had finally clicked. Not a passenger, not a corporate client. The Elias Vance, the owner, the man who signed the checks for the entire multi-billion-dollar enterprise, including his own paltry salary. Henderson's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Brenda hadn't made the connection yet. She was still cocooned in her own self-righteousness. "Sir, I don't care who you have on the phone," she blustered. "You are not getting on this flight." "David," Elias said into the phone, ignoring Brenda completely. "How far away are you from Terminal 4? "I'm in the Sky Lounge at Terminal 5. 5 minutes. Maybe less if I run. Don't move. Don't let them move. I am on my way." The line went dead. Elias lowered his phone and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at the two airline employees who had, in the space of 15 minutes, become the architects of their own professional ruin. "My colleague will be here in 5 minutes," he said simply. "He is the chief operating officer of Aura Airlines. I suggest we wait for him to arrive before anyone calls security." Henderson was now visibly trembling. Sweat beaded on his shiny forehead. He stared at Elias, his mind frantically replaying the entire interaction, recasting it in a horrifying new light. The quiet man, the polite requests, the calm demeanor. It wasn't the behavior of a scammer. It was the quiet confidence of a king inspecting his domain. He had threatened to have the owner of the airline arrested. Brenda, however, was still lagging behind. The name Elias Vance meant nothing to her. She only heard that a COO was coming. To her, this was just a further escalation. He'd managed to get some high-level executive on the phone. Well, she'd just have to show this COO that she was right, that she was just following protocol. Her arrogance was a shield, protecting her from the terrifying truth that was bearing down on her. "Fine," she snapped, though her voice wavered slightly, a small crack in her facade. "Let's wait for your Mr. Chen. He'll see I was just doing my job." The passengers in line were murmuring, sensing the dramatic shift in power. Sarah, the law student, was still recording, her camera a silent witness to the impending corporate execution. She knew she was capturing something extraordinary. The next 4 minutes felt like an eternity. Henderson was trying to speak, to apologize, but his words came out as a garbled mess of stutters and half-formed sentences. "Sir, Mr. Vance, there seems to have been a misunderstanding." Elias just looked at him, his expression unreadable. He offered no absolution. He just waited. Then they saw him, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, sprinting through the terminal, his tie flying over his shoulder. He ran with a desperate urgency, weaving through crowds of travelers, his face a mask of controlled panic. This was David Chen, the COO of Aura Airlines, a man who typically traveled by private car service and was escorted through VIP channels. He was now running like a man trying to stop a bomb from detonating. He skidded to a halt in front of the gate, breathing heavily, his eyes wild. He ignored Brenda and Henderson completely. His entire focus was on Elias. "Mr. Vance," he panted, straightening his tie. "I am so sorry. I came as fast as I could. Are you all right?" Elias gave a slight nod. "I'm fine, David. Just a little delayed." David Chen finally turned his attention to his two employees. His face, which had been panicked, now hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He looked at Brenda and then at Henderson, and in his eyes they saw the end of their careers. "What did you do?" he asked, each word a chip of ice. Brenda's smugness finally shattered. The reality of the situation crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. She looked at the unassuming man in the cashmere sweater, then at the frantic, furious COO, and her mind finally connected the dots. E. Vance, Elias Vance, Vance Capital, the firm that had bought the airline. Her face went ashen, the blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, sickly grey. Her mouth hung open, a silent O of disbelief and horror. The woman who, minutes before, had wielded her minor authority like a weapon, now looked like a small, terrified child who had just broken her father's most prized possession. She had not just insulted a passenger, she had insulted her king. For a moment, the only sound at Gate B24 was the low hum of the terminal, and the frantic thumping of two hearts realizing their world had just imploded. David Chen stood like a statue of righteous anger, his gaze oscillating between Brenda and Henderson. "I asked a question," David said, his voice dangerously low. "What happened here?" It was Henderson who found his voice first, a weak, reedy thing. "David." "Mr. Chen, there was a system flag, a security alert on the booking. We were just following procedure." "Procedure?" David's laugh was short and utterly without humor. "Procedure is to assist our first-class passengers, not to harass them. Procedure is to use discretion and common sense. Procedure is not to threaten the chairman of the board with airport security. Are you out of your mind?" The title chairman of the board hit the remaining onlookers like a shockwave. Whispers rippled through the line. The man in the suit who had told Elias to move along now seemed to be trying to shrink into his expensive suit. Brenda was mute, her entire body trembling. Her 15 years of service, her seniority, her carefully constructed sense of superiority, it had all evaporated. She was nakedly exposed, not as a diligent employee, but as a prejudiced bully. Elias finally spoke, his voice cutting through David's fury. "David, that's enough!" David stopped, turning to Elias, his anger instantly receding into deference. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. This is unacceptable. It's a disgrace to everything we've tried to build." "It is," Elias agreed, his voice calm and measured. "But shouting at the gate won't fix the systemic issue this has exposed." He then looked directly at Brenda, who flinched as if he had physically struck her. "Brenda," he said, and her head snapped up at the sound of her name. "I want you to look at me and tell me the truth. Was there really a security alert on my booking?" Brenda's eyes darted from Elias to David, then to the floor. She swallowed hard. The system, the truth," Elias repeated, his voice gentle but insistent. "I have access to the full system logs, Brenda. So does David. So, tell me now, was there an alert, or was there something about me you just didn't like?" The question hung in the air, a direct and devastating accusation. She couldn't lie. Not now. Her silence was her confession. She had seen a black man in expensive clothes in a first-class line, and her mind had short-circuited, defaulting to a dark, ugly prejudice she had harbored for years. The system flag was a lie, a tool she had invented to legitimize her bias. I thought," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity. Elias just nodded slowly, a deep, profound sadness in his eyes. "That's what I thought." He then turned his attention to the other passengers. He saw their discomfort, their impatience. He knew this incident hadn't just affected him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice projecting easily across the waiting area. "My name is Elias Vance. I am the owner of Aura Airlines. On behalf of the entire company, I want to apologize for this unacceptable delay and for the disgraceful scene you have had to witness." He walked over to Sarah, the law student. "Thank you for speaking up," he said quietly. "It's rare and it's appreciated. Are you traveling for school?" "Yes, sir," she said, still slightly starstruck, her phone now lowered. "A semester abroad at the London School of Economics." "Excellent," Elias said with a warm smile. "David, please ensure this young lady is upgraded to our Global First Suite for the inconvenience, and cover her book and tuition fees for the semester. Consider it the first award from the new Aura Airlines Civil Courage Scholarship." Sarah's jaw dropped. She was speechless. Elias then addressed the rest of the first-class cabin. "For everyone in the priority line who was delayed, you will all be receiving a full refund for your flight and 100,000 bonus miles credited to your accounts. My COO will take your details." The mood in the line shifted instantly from annoyance to astonishment. Finally, he looked back at the two disgraced employees. He didn't fire them on the spot. That would be too easy, too theatrical. His actions were always more considered, more precise. "David," he said, turning back to his COO, "take Mr. Henderson and Brenda to the corporate office. Place them on immediate indefinite suspension pending a full investigation by Human Resources. Revoke their security credentials. I want a top-down review of gate agent training protocols with a new module focused on unconscious bias. I want it drafted and on my desk by Monday." He then looked at Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, your failure was one of nerve. You backed a bad decision because you were too cowardly to question it. That is not a quality of a leader." Then his gaze settled on Brenda. Her face was a mess of tears and ruined makeup. "And Brenda," he said, his voice soft but devastating, "your failure was one of character. You judged a person based on the color of their skin. There is no training module for that. You didn't just fail at your job. You failed as a person." With that, he picked up his boarding pass from the counter. He handed it to a junior gate agent who had been watching the entire scene with wide, terrified eyes. The young man scanned it. A cheerful beep echoed in the now silent terminal. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Vance," the young man whispered, his hand shaking. Elias nodded, and without a backward glance at the ruins of the two careers he had just dismantled, he walked down the jet bridge, a quiet man on his way to London, leaving a quiet but permanent reckoning in his wake. The moment Elias Vance disappeared down the jet bridge, a new reality settled over Gate B24. The delayed passengers were now being tended to with a frantic, almost comical level of obsequious service by David Chen himself, who was personally taking down names and frequent flyer numbers, his face a grim mask of damage control. The junior gate agent who had scanned Elias's pass was now processing the remaining passengers with trembling hands, avoiding everyone's gaze. The story was already spreading, whispered from passenger to passenger, from gate agent to ground crew. The legend of Quiet Elias and the gate agent who crossed him was being born in real time. Meanwhile, Brenda and Mark Henderson were escorted away by an airport security detail that David Chen had summoned. It wasn't an arrest, but the effect was the same. They walked through the crowded terminal, flanked by uniformed officers, a walk of shame witnessed by hundreds of strangers. Brenda kept her head down, her face hidden by a curtain of her severe hair, but she could feel the stares, the pointing fingers, the muttered comments. She had gone from being an authority figure to a public spectacle in less than 30 minutes. They were led not to the regular HR office, but to a sterile, windowless conference room in the executive wing, a place usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations or terminating senior vice presidents. They sat in silence for over an hour, the silence broken only by Brenda's occasional sniffles. Henderson just stared at his hands, replaying his own cowardice over and over. He could have stopped it. He could have intervened, overruled her, and apologized to the passenger. But he'd chosen the easy path, and it had led him straight off a cliff. The investigation was swift and brutal. Sarah, the law student, had emailed her video to the address David Chen had given her. It was damning. It captured Brenda's initial condescension, her lies about the security alert, Henderson's weak capitulation, and their threat to call security, paired with the system logs, which showed absolutely no flags on Elias Vance's booking. The case was open and shut. By the next morning, both were formally terminated. The letter cited gross misconduct, violation of company-wide anti-discrimination policies, and endangerment of the Airline's brand. But for Brenda, this was only the beginning of the karma. The story, fanned by the dozens of witnesses, hit social media like a wildfire. Someone dubbed her Gatekeeper Brenda. Sarah's video, which she had anonymously leaked to a popular travel blog, went viral. It was viewed millions of times. News outlets picked it up. Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, CNN. They didn't use her full name, but they didn't have to. The video was clear enough that anyone who knew her would recognize her instantly. Her digital footprint became a toxic wasteland. Her LinkedIn profile was flooded with angry messages. Her community Facebook group was filled with posts from neighbors expressing their shock and disgust. Old friends stopped calling. The manager at her local grocery store suddenly seemed too busy to chat. She had become a pariah in her own life. She tried to find another job in the airline industry. It was all she knew, but it was a surprisingly small, interconnected world. The moment a recruiter Googled her or a background check was run, the viral story would surface. No airline would touch her. She was blacklisted, not by an official decree, but by the sheer infamy of her actions. After 3 months of rejections, her savings began to dwindle. Mark Henderson faced a similar, if quieter, fate. His name wasn't as public, but within the executive and managerial circles of aviation, he was finished. His reputation was that of a spineless manager who couldn't handle a basic customer issue and allowed a situation to escalate to the point of threatening the company's owner. He was the cautionary tale told in management training seminars. He eventually had to sell his house in the suburbs and move 2 states away to take a job as a night manager at a budget motel off a highway, a ghost in the graveyard of his own career. The most potent karma for Brenda, however, came 6 months after the incident. Broke, desperate and humbled, she finally found a job. It was a customer service position at a massive, impersonal call center for a large telecom company. Her new job consisted of sitting in a tiny cubicle for 8 hours a day, wearing a cheap headset, and listening to a relentless stream of angry, frustrated customers. She was no longer the one with the power, the one who could say no. Now, she was the one who had to absorb the anger, the one who had to de-escalate, the one who had to apologize for things that weren't her fault. She was instructed to follow a strict script, her every word monitored, her every call timed. She had become a cog in a machine far larger and more impersonal than the one she had once commanded at Gate B24. Every day was a lesson in the powerlessness she had so casually inflicted on others. While Brenda and Henderson were dealing with the fallout of their actions, Elias Vance was in London, not celebrating his victory, but working. The incident at JFK hadn't just been a personal affront. It had been a diagnostic test of his own company, and the results were alarming. It revealed a sickness in the culture he was trying to build, a rot of prejudice and apathy that he had a responsibility to excise. He didn't want Airlines to be a place where employees lived in fear of the mystery shopping owner. He wanted it to be a place where treating every single person with dignity was the default setting, the core of the company's DNA, regardless of who was watching. From his suite at the Savoy, overlooking the Thames, he began to architect a complete overhaul of the company's customer-facing philosophy. The new initiative was called the Vance Mandate. It wasn't just another corporate training module. It was a fundamental shift in company culture. First, he commissioned a leading sociological research firm to conduct a deep, anonymous audit of the company's workforce, identifying patterns of unconscious bias in hiring, promotion, and customer interactions. The results were uncomfortable but necessary. They showed that Brenda wasn't just one bad apple, she was a symptom of a broader problem. Second, he personally designed a new training program that every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the CEO, was required to complete annually. It wasn't a boring slideshow about diversity. It was an immersive, scenario-based program run by professional empathy coaches and civil rights experts. Employees were put in simulations, forced to see the world from the perspective of passengers of different races, abilities, and backgrounds. They learned about the history of travel segregation, the subtle power dynamics at play in a service interaction, and the real-world impact of microaggressions. Third, he fundamentally changed the incentive structure. Gate agents and flight attendants were no longer rewarded solely on on-time departures. A significant portion of their bonuses was now tied directly to customer satisfaction scores and peer reviews that specifically measured compassion and problem-solving skills. He empowered them to solve problems on the spot, giving every gate agent a discretionary fund of up to $500 to immediately compensate a passenger for an issue, no supervisor approval needed. He was giving them the power to say, yes. But the most personal touch was the dignity grant. Elias established a multi-million-dollar fund in his late mother's name, a woman who had worked her whole life as a housekeeper and had often been treated as invisible. This grant was awarded to employees who were nominated by their peers for going above and beyond in showing exceptional kindness or integrity, especially in a difficult situation. The award wasn't a plaque, it was a significant cash bonus and an extra week of paid vacation. He was making kindness a key performance indicator. The changes were met with some initial resistance from old guard employees who grumbled about woke corporate nonsense. But Elias was relentless. He and David Chen held town halls at every major hub, from New York to Los Angeles to London. He spoke not as a distant chairman, but as a man who believed in the soul of his company. He told them the story of what happened at JFK, not to shame Brenda, but to illustrate a point. The brand isn't the logo on the tail of the plane, he told a packed hangar of employees at LAX. It's not the champagne we serve in first class. It's the feeling a person has when they interact with you. It's the assumption of goodwill. Brenda assumed the worst of me. Our policy, our entire culture, must be to assume the best in our customers and to bring out the best in ourselves. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift. The stories that went viral about Aura Airlines were no longer about bad service. They were about a gate agent who used her discretionary fund to buy a new suit for a man who had his ruined by a spilled drink just before a job interview. They were about a flight attendant who learned sign language to communicate with a deaf child on her flight. The Vance mandate was working. Aura Airlines started winning awards, not just for its luxury cabins, but for its customer service. Its stock price soared. Elias Vance had taken one of the most humiliating experiences of his life and used it as fuel. He didn't just punish the guilty. He used the moment to build something better, to transform his entire organization. It was a quiet, profound act of alchemy, turning the lead of prejudice into the gold of a truly dignified enterprise. A year can feel like a lifetime, or the blink of an eye. For Elias Vance, it was a year of focused, intentional construction, building a new culture brick by brick. For Brenda, it was a year of free fall, followed by a hard landing in a place she never imagined. Her new world was a universe contained within a 6-foot-wide grey cubicle, under the perpetual, humming glare of fluorescent lights that gave everyone's skin a sickly, pale cast. She worked for Omnicom, a telecommunications behemoth, as a Tier 1 customer support agent. Her life once governed by the grand schedules of Boeing 777s and the tangible authority of a gate agent's uniform, was now dictated by a ruthless, ever-present algorithm displayed on the corner of her monitor. AHT, average handle time. CSAT, customer satisfaction. FCR, first call resolution. She was no longer a person, but a collection of three-letter acronyms, a data point in a vast, indifferent machine. For the first few months, bitterness was her constant companion. It was a sour, acidic taste in her mouth when she woke up in her cramped, one-bedroom apartment, the one she'd been forced to move into after selling her house. She would scroll through old photos on her phone, images of her standing proudly in her Airline's uniform, and a hot, searing resentment would rise in her chest. She blamed the nameless, faceless mob on the internet who had turned her into a meme. She blamed the law student, that smug girl with her phone. Most of all, she blamed Elias Vance, the quiet, unassuming man who had held all the cards and had chosen to bring her entire world crashing down. In her mind, she was the victim, a hard-working woman made an example of by a vindictive billionaire. Her supervisor, a man named Gary, with a perpetually forced smile and eyes that never seemed to blink, was a master of corporate doublespeak. "We're not just a team, Brenda. We're a family," he'd say in morning huddles, moments before threatening to write people up for exceeding their allotted 2 minutes of wrap-up time between calls. He was a walking embodiment of the soullessness of her new reality. The calls were a relentless tide of human frustration, angry shouts about billing errors, confused pleas from people whose technology had failed them, absurd, impossible demands. Brenda learned to dissociate. She became a robot, her voice a monotone instrument that read from a script. "I understand your frustration. Let me see what I can do for you. As per our policy." She became exactly the kind of employee she had once despised from the other side of the counter, an unfeeling wall of bureaucracy. It was easier that way. Caring was inefficient. Caring drove up your AHT. Then came the call that would subtly, but irrevocably, alter her trajectory. It was a Tuesday, the grey, drizzling sky outside her window, perfectly matching the grey of her cubicle and the grey of her mood. The digital tone chimed in her ear. "Omnicom, this is Brenda. How can I help you?" she recited, her eyes already glazing over. "Hello? Hello, dear?" The voice was thin, frail and trembling with a mixture of fear and agitation. I'm so sorry to bother you, but my picture box, the internet, it's been dark for 3 days. 3 whole days." Brenda's fingers automatically began typing, pulling up the diagnostic prompts. "Okay, Mum, I can help you with that. Can you tell me if the third light from the left on your modem is flashing or solid?" "Oh, I don't know, dear. My hands shake so much, I'm afraid to touch all those wires," the woman fretted. "It's just, today is Tuesday. My grandchildren, we do a picture call every Tuesday. It's the only time I get to see them. Little Lily is starting to talk, and I'm missing it." The woman's voice cracked on the last sentence. In that sound, Brenda heard something beyond simple customer frustration. She heard the deep, aching pang of loneliness. For a reason she couldn't explain, the image of a grandmother unable to see her baby granddaughter's first words pierced through the robotic shell she had built around herself. She looked at her screen. Her AHT for the current call was already approaching the 3-minute mark. Gary had recently sent out a memo about efficient call flow management. The script in front of her had a clear path. If the customer cannot perform the diagnostic, schedule a technician and end the call. The earliest appointment would be in 5 days. The old Brenda, the gate agent, would have seen this as the customer's problem. Rules are rules. But the new Brenda, the one sitting in this grey box, stripped of all power and pride, hesitated. She remembered the feeling of being dismissed, of being told to go elsewhere, of her own reasonable request being flattened by an unyielding wall of protocol. She closed the diagnostic script pop-up on her screen. "Mum, what's your name?" Brenda asked, her voice softer. "It's Margaret," the woman sniffled. "Margaret," Brenda said, leaning into her microphone. "Tell me about Lily. Does she look like her mum or her dad?" For the next 10 minutes, Brenda did something she hadn't done in a year. She listened. She didn't try to solve a technical issue. She connected with a human being. Margaret, starved for contact, opened up. She spoke about her daughter who lived 3 states away, about her late husband, about how the picture call was the highlight of her entire week. Brenda's AHT timer on her screen turned from yellow to a glaring, angry red. She knew Gary's system would flag it. She didn't care. When Margaret finally ran out of words, a measure of peace seemed to have settled over her. "Oh my goodness, dear," she said. "I'm so sorry. I've just talked your ear off." "Not at all, Margaret," Brenda said, feeling a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. "Now let's get you back online so you don't miss another minute of Lily." She dove into the system, not as a script reader, but as an advocate. She bypassed the standard scheduling queue and found a back-end portal for emergency dispatches. She coded the issue as a vulnerable customer critical outage, a designation usually reserved for medical emergencies. She promised a technician would be there the next morning. She gave Margaret her personal extension number, a cardinal sin in the call center world. The moment the call ended, Gary was standing by her cubicle, his plastic smile gone, replaced by a tight, disapproving line. "Brenda, a 17-minute call for a simple outage?" he said, tapping a pen on her cubicle wall. "What was that? We're not therapists here. We are resolution agents. Your metrics took a nosedive." Brenda braced herself for a write-up, or worse. She looked up at him, at his neat tie and his dead eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel fear or resentment. She felt pity. "A woman was going to miss seeing her grandchild, Gary," she said simply. "I resolved it." He just shook his head and walked away, muttering about efficiency. But the threat felt hollow. The next afternoon, Brenda's extension rang. It was Margaret, her voice overflowing with joy. The technician had come. The internet was working. She had just finished a 2-hour call with her family and had seen Lily say, "Gaga." "Thank you, Brenda," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just fix my internet. You were so kind." After the call, Brenda sat in the humming silence of her cubicle. Kindness. It was a word she hadn't thought about in a long time. It was a currency she had refused to trade in, and its absence had left her bankrupt. She hadn't gotten her old life back. She hadn't been redeemed in the eyes of the world. But in that small, anonymous moment, she had helped one person, and in doing so had found a single, solitary brick to begin rebuilding her own character. The karma hadn't been a single lightning strike. It was a long, arduous education in the empathy she had so spectacularly failed to show. Meanwhile, in that same drizzling New York weather, Elias Vance sat in the Airline's flagship lounge at JFK, a space he had personally helped design. It was all clean lines, warm woods, and soft lighting, a sanctuary from the chaos of the terminal. He was on his way to Singapore for a board meeting, but he'd arrived early. He was observing. He watched a bartender, handle a belligerent, demanding passenger with a calm, disarming smile, de-escalating the situation with a grace that couldn't be taught from a manual. He saw a lounge attendant notice a mother struggling with a baby and 2 carry-ons, and quietly approach her to help, carrying her bags to a comfortable seat and bringing her a bottle of water. These were the small, almost invisible data points he was looking for. This was the Vance mandate in action. He was looking over some quarterly reports when the young gate agent for his flight approached him. Not because she knew who he was, but because he was listed as a Global Services member on her manifest. "Mr. Vance," she said, her smile genuine. She wore a small silver pin on her blazer lapel, shaped like a wing. It was the Dignity Grant nominee pin. "We'll be starting our pre-boarding in about 20 minutes. I just wanted to let you know. Can I get you anything before then? A coffee, perhaps?" "I'm fine, thank you," he said, returning her smile. "That's a nice pin. You were nominated." Her face lit up. "Oh, yes, last month. A passenger had his wedding suit lost by a connecting airline, and he was flying to his own wedding. It was awful. I used my discretionary fund to connect with a tailor near the destination airport, got his measurements, and had a rental tux waiting for him at his hotel when he landed. My manager nominated me." She beamed with a pride that was clearly about more than just a job. "That's incredible," Elias said, genuinely impressed. "That's exactly what this airline is about." As he made his way to the gate later, he watched the scene unfold. The gate area was calm, organized. The agents were proactive, smiling. The passenger directly in front of him, a nervous-looking man, presented his boarding pass. The agent frowned slightly. "Sir, it looks like there's a slight name mismatch between your passport and the ticket," she said. Elias felt a faint, phantom echo of his own experience. His body tensed instinctively, but the agent's tone was not accusatory. It was collaborative. "Don't you worry," she continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "This happens sometimes. Just a typo. It'll only take me a moment to fix for you." The passenger breathed a visible sigh of relief. "Oh, thank you. I was so worried." "Not a problem at all," the agent chirped. "That's what we're here for." She issued him a new boarding pass, and he went on his way, relieved and grateful. When Elias stepped forward, the young agent with the pin smiled at him again. "Mr. Vance, welcome back." She scanned his pass. "Beep, have a wonderful flight to Singapore." She had no idea that the man she was speaking to was the architect of the very policies that allowed her to be so effective, so human. She wasn't performing for the boss. She was just doing her job. The culture had shifted. The system he had built was working, not because people were afraid of him, but because they were empowered to be their best selves. As he walked down the jet bridge, the quiet corridor, a gateway to the sky, he felt a profound sense of peace. He thought, briefly, of Brenda. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a distant, melancholic hope that she had found some understanding in the wreckage of her life. His victory hadn't been in her downfall, but in the rise of the countless other employees who now understood the simple, powerful truth that had become his company's mantra. Dignity was not a luxury item for the front of the plane. It was the standard ticket for every human journey. This story serves as a powerful reminder that our true character is revealed not by the power we have, but by how we choose to wield it, especially when we think no one important is watching. Brenda's small act of prejudice had devastating consequences, not just for her career, but for her entire life, forcing her onto a painful path of rediscovering the humanity she had denied another. In contrast, Elias Vance, a man who could have responded with fury and vengeance, chose a more difficult, but far more meaningful path. He used a moment of personal humiliation to enact systemic change, proving that true leadership isn't about punishing individuals, but about uplifting an entire culture. It's a testament to the idea that karma isn't just about cosmic revenge. It's about the lessons the universe forces us to learn, one way or another. If this story of justice, karma, and the quiet power of character resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories with unexpected twists and powerful lessons. Let us know in the comments what you think Brenda's most important lesson was. Thank you for listening.